My name is Laurie Halloran. I'm founder and president of Halloran Consulting Group. In early May, Hannah approached me, Hannah Yee, who is one of my stars. She approached me and said, we should try and interview the new Bio CEO, Michelle McMurry-Heath. So we've done lots and lots of work to set this up, and here we are today, and I want to turn it over to Hannah to take it away.
Thank you, Laurie. And yes, I am so happy to introduce Dr. Michelle McMurry-Heath, who became Bio's new president and CEO on June 1st. A medical doctor and molecular immunologist by training, she is just the third leader of Bio since the organization's founding in 1993. She is a clinician scientist with an MD PhD in molecular immunology from Duke, and her leadership experience spans the executive branch, the US Senate, the nonprofit sector, and the biopharmaceutical industry. During what I imagine has been a whirlwind of a first couple months on the job, Dr. McMurry-Heath has already sent a strong call to action, urging all of us in biotech and life science to take more responsibility for providing equal opportunity within and access to our industry. As a woman-owned and woman-founded company, we at Halloran are thrilled to follow your lead, Dr. McMurry-Heath, and we are so excited for today's conversation. Thank you very much for joining us. So let's jump right into the discussion. To start off, what was your path to your new role as Bio CEO, and what learnings from your past positions do you see as particularly relevant for your new role?
Well, path implies that I knew where I was going. And it was really much more organic than that. I loved being at the bench as an undergrad. I loved the discovery process of science, and that led me to do an MD PhD degree. And I remember I had a year where I just had to breed transgenic mice. There was not much to do other than move mice around in cages. And I started taking some science policy courses in my spare time and got really intrigued by the whole question of who decides what research gets done by deciding which dollar gets spent where, particularly at the federal level. That was in part because my first husband battled cystic fibrosis, and so we were watching him participate in clinical trials and trying to judge whether or not research was going fast enough or slow. And so we were very tuned in to this whole question of how rapid is scientific progress and does it meet the demand that patients really have for it. So I really enjoyed those classes, ended up evolving into a science policy fellowship in DC for a year. I went back to work in Children's National Medical Center, and then got recruited to work in Senator Lieberman's office, first for his Senate role, but then also supporting his presidential campaign, and loved that national dialogue around how do we provide accessible health insurance and health care to every American. I just think it's such an interesting conundrum. But the senator was unique in that he really wanted to mix that with the question of how do we support a thriving biotech industry, because it is the engine of health progress. So you can't just turn over the keys without any gas. You really have to be able to have both. And so that really kind of honed my view of thinking about this question much more holistically than I think we sometimes do. From there, I went to the Aspen Institute, which is a think tank, and got to start a health policy section of a think tank from scratch over 5 years, which was fantastically fun. And as part of that work, I was brought into the Obama administration transition team for science around the National Science Foundation, and ended up getting recruited to FDA, where I worked in the Center for Devices and Radiological Health, and just loved it. We got to focus a lot on how you not just ask patients what they want, but measure what patients want, really trying to quantitatively detect their desire for certain benefits and their hesitance for certain risks. And what we found was very interesting was that reviewers, not just in the US, but globally, are often overly conservative on behalf of patients, and they don't necessarily guess correctly when they think they know what patients are looking for and what they really fear. And so the more we can have that dialogue with patients, the better. From there, I was recruited to Johnson & Johnson, where I led regulatory for a global team, and then regulatory and clinical for all the medical device businesses for about 4 years, and then got an opportunity to work across all of Johnson & Johnson, which is pharmaceuticals, consumer, and devices in their external innovation group, which is the group that goes out and finds small biotech companies to partner with and to support and to really foster the growth of. And that's when Bio called. So it was a very interesting journey, and I always just responded to what I was most interested in and passionate about, and the opportunity to make a difference. And I think when you just keep yourself open to those two trajectories, even if you don't know where they'll lead you, they always lead you to the right place.
Wow, Michelle, you have touched so many, areas of healthcare from so many different angles. And I bet through all those steps along the journey, you never thought you'd be starting a role like this in the middle of a global pandemic. It's definitely an interesting time to be starting a new job. What is your near-term agenda for Bio in the context of 2019? And in what direction do you see industry heading in the long term?
Mm. To me, the job that we have at hand as an industry is to get everyone around us to appreciate what we get to see every day, which is the passion, the commitment, the brilliance, the dedication to changing the world and improving health that is our industry. And I think it's a puzzlement to many people in our industry how we got to a situation where the industry is so disparaged and so poorly regarded. That is starting to change in the midst of COVID. I think we're now in a situation where the average consumer knows what it feels like to wait for a medical solution that's not there, that's not yet available. And not just wait to get into the doctor's office, but knowing even if you get into the doctor's office, the doctor cannot yet help you because there's not the science there at the ready to really make a difference. And that gives us an opportunity to really restart that dialogue with the American public about why we have not risen to the task of explaining what we do, explaining why it's critical, and moving forward from there. I very much see science as a social justice issue. I think it's the social justice issue of our age. And I say that because as the daughter of public health leaders, I got to see firsthand growing up how poor and vulnerable communities were really locked into those inequalities because of their poor access to scientific breakthroughs and the poor application of scientific breakthroughs to their needs. So we can argue till we're blue in the face about how much a drug that's on the shelf costs. But if we're not talking about the engine that's putting new medicines on that shelf and making sure that that engine is trained its sights on the needs of vulnerable communities and is trying to help those communities, then we will just perpetuate injustice. And that's what I would like for us to include in the national dialogue. It's not all of the conversation. We have an amazing story to tell about how we can be probably the economic engine of our recovery. So there's lots of other ways in which our industry is the answer. But I want to include that train of thought in the conversation as well.
And Michelle, I love how you framed this challenge as such an opportunity. And, I'm sure I'm not alone in saying that it's so wonderful in this moment to have something to look forward to these days. And this agenda of yours definitely is giving us some hope and some optimism in such a challenging time. And as you mentioned, the biopharmaceutical industry as a whole has enjoyed a higher profile and kind of perceived benefit to the public during the era of COVID-19. And how can we build on this new identity to ensure that, one, the public has a better understanding and appreciation for the work of drug development, and two, with that increased visibility, what is our duty in ensuring that people in the US have healthcare that both protects them and supports them?
Mm. Well, we've definitely taken the right first steps. So, for example, at the Biotechnology Innovation Organization, we started a COVID tracker to track all global product development programs that are trained on COVID. And in 7 months, actually, we're almost up to 8 months now, there have been over 700 projects started globally to focus on COVID. That includes vaccines and therapeutics, 181 vaccine projects alone. 70% of those are in small companies, 50% of those are US based. It's incredible to see how, particularly our small companies that are usually operating on such a slim margin and have no guarantee of tomorrow, have put all those personal concerns aside, not to mention their concerns about safety, to work around the clock to try to generate solutions for COVID. We are responding to the human need in a way that no one has ever seen before. And the progress has been incredibly fast because of that dedication and cooperation and really just rallying to the call. So that's step one. Step two is something I think we are in the midst of doing, which is making sure we're explaining ourselves along the way, trying to explain how the science is working, how uncertain scientific research is as it unfolds, and trying to tell the story of the data in a way that reaches people and touches people. So I think there's a lot that's going on and that's going right in that regard. And Dr. Fauci is emblematic of one of our leaders that's doing just that. But that's not going to be enough, right? We're going to produce a cure. We're going to produce a vaccine. That's all but certain at this point. But what we're going to be asked to do next is to make sure that we are equally as committed to access to those therapies and vaccines, that we are seen out there on the front lines yelling if we have to make sure everyone who needs these new breakthroughs gets them. And two, that we are there to explain and have compassion for any adverse events that happen. One of the things you learn at the FDA is there is no pristine, perfect cure or medical intervention. Every medical intervention carries risk. And so any intervention that you have to deliver at this sort of scale, hundreds of millions of doses, when we're talking about vaccines, for example, to otherwise healthy people, there are going to be certain rates of things that are unanticipated, unintended consequences. And we have to be just as compassionate and caring about that as we've been about the research to get across the goal line.
That's another whole area of study that people will have to learn in real life. I see that's coming up for us. I was hoping to change the conversation a little bit towards you and towards your wonderful new position as the first CEO, first female CEO of Bio. As we mentioned earlier, Halloran is a women-founded, women-owned company, and we actually have an all-female executive team. There's a much greater proportion of women founder and executives in these times. California's mandate to include women on every public board is a great example of the work being done to increase gender parity in life science. But as we all know well, there's still a very real glass ceiling. How have you seen the evolution of gender equity from your perspective, and what still needs to be done to increase parity across the life science ecosystem and beyond?
Well, there's so much that still needs to be done, that's for sure. I mean, it's wonderful to see companies like Halloran, and it's wonderful to see, for example, that since Bio started their workforce diversity and inclusion program, which was a subcommittee of the board about 3 years ago, we think we've played a small part in increasing the number of women around the corporate board tables, because that was really their stated goal. And it's great to see the progress that has been made, but there is so much further to go. I have an 8-year-old daughter, and when I look around at her friends and herself, it's interesting that they see gender and the limitations thereof completely differently than I think I did growing up. And so it gives me a lot of hope for the future to see how the barriers are evolving. They still may be some, and there still are some, but they're melting and breaking down as we go. And so that is something we really need to focus on and set our sights on. But we have to do everything we can to encourage women-owned businesses, encourage minority-owned businesses, speak to the need for diversity, not just to meet a corporate social responsibility goal, but to actually produce solutions, products, and outcomes that your target communities, that your customers are looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And Michelle, on the topic of equity, we know gender is, of course, only part of the conversation. And the state of global and national affairs is, of course, demonstrating that racial equity is not anywhere near where it needs to be. And along these lines, the press has featured your perspective on social justice and how it interacts with access to science. And we so admire the swiftness with which you launched the Bioequality Initiative. Can you talk a little about this effort and what you're hoping to achieve?
Sure. It's been amazing because the enthusiasm within our board at Bio and within the biotech community has been tremendous. And I'm so appreciative of the support and the great ideas and energy that has been volunteered for launching this initiative. So the bioequality agenda is really our starting point, and it has three pillars. The first is making a huge and demonstrative stand for health equality, for ending health disparities. And that's a twofold goal. One is to make sure that we're demonstrating that we're walking the walk by pressing for access to COVID therapies that's equitable and just. And two, that we are pushing for better representation in clinical trials. And this is important when it comes to racial and ethnic minorities. It's important when it comes to representation of women in clinical trials. We need the trials to reflect the people that they're eventually going to serve. So that is something that Bio is going to be out there on front trying to push for. We're already trying to help that cause within the COVID vaccine trials, but there's a lot more to do. Number two is around hiring and promotion. We want to make sure that minority candidates are seen and heard and given opportunity to progress within our biotech companies. So I was one of the many that has benefited from one of the great minority training programs that our company runs. I had a United Negro College Fund Merck Fellowship as a graduate student. And many of our companies have been doing this kind of work for decades. And it's not just the large companies. Biogen, for example, has trained over 250 African-American scientists in the Boston area over the last 10 years. So it's a range of companies that have started these programs. But once people go through the programs, they're not necessarily tracked. They're lost to follow up sometimes. And so we're hoping to create a LinkedIn type avenue for all the alumni from those corporate training programs to be visible to the 1,000 member companies within Bio, so that as those companies are filling positions and looking for promoting individuals, they'll have that as well as a pool of amazing talent. And then thirdly, we really want to do what we can to support the growth of minority and women-owned businesses. Economic development is going to be so important, as we referenced earlier, as we climb back out of the hole that COVID has dug for us. And so we want to make sure that our supply chains for our 1,000 bio member companies are really doing everything they can to patronize those minority and women-owned businesses. So for example, we have a program called Bio Business Solutions that helps our small companies get purchasing deals that they would otherwise need to be large companies to receive. And we want to highlight the women and minority owned businesses within that, as well as give those companies great kudos and credit for the diversity that they have within their ranks. So that is going to be another way that we're really out there making sure that minority owned businesses are also progressing.
This is wonderful. We've noticed the same large gaps in the industry, and one of the things that we've been doing is working locally with a consortium of companies. In Massachusetts, one way we've been trying to address this is collectively as a ecosystem, topping a program called Project On-Ramp that introduces college students to the industry as a way to both build the pipeline for new talent and to broaden the base to support the local residents who may not even know the industry exists. So how can, in your mind, how can we harness local efforts so that on a national or international level, we're able to share best practices and leverage these learnings and these efforts so that there's a more harmonized and systematic way to approach these populations more broadly?
I'm smiling because just earlier today I was on a call with the founder of Life Science Cares, and he was
Okay.
actually talking about Project On-Ramp. And I think that's exactly the model. We need to figure out how we can lift up those local efforts to reach those grassroots community service programs and projects to really make a difference in healing our communities. So Bio will be there to support where we can, serve as a backbone where we can, but I do think it will take a lot of local efforts, but also dissemination of best practices like Project On-Ramp when a local effort strikes gold like that.
And Dr. McMurry-Heath, we so admire your vision and your ambition, and we're hopeful that during your term we'll see that real change in the demographic of folks who work in science. And, you know, along those lines, what message would you like to send to these people who aren't interested in the industry for whatever reason? And maybe that reason is that they feel there's not a path forward for them.
I'd like to say that, you know, our industry is an industry of pioneers. You know, I think no matter what your background is, if you come in and thrive in the biotechnology sector, you're probably both optimistic and brave. And so I couldn't think of a better place for people to bring their pioneering spirit for, you know, setting the world on fire, breaking down barriers, and having progress that's never been achieved before than the life science sector, because that's what our business is, that's what our business does. So if you have that spirit, come and let it thrive and grow within the life sciences.
I also say to anyone who will listen to me that even if they don't want to be a scientist, there are incredible jobs that aren't necessarily science, but that they need to understand that the industry exists before they can really even know where to go in it. So I'm a
Very
big
true.
proponent of the same thing.
And finally, I can't believe we're already at the end of this conversation, but to wrap things up, Halloran's network is comprised of a multitude of life science companies spanning all phases of development, but most are early stage biotech companies. What message would you like to send to this community that will connect them to Bio's agenda for your term?
That they're the lifeblood. You know, it's interesting. 95% of Bio's 1,000 company membership are small companies, and they are the most creative, the most innovative, the most groundbreaking, and usually disruptive by nature. And if there's ever been an area that's needed disruption, it's healthcare. so keep on keeping on, and don't let a momentary setback or even, you know, the failure of one company stop you, because one of the greatest blessings of this role has been the opportunity to meet so many dynamic CEOs, and many of them have both success stories and failure stories, and I think they wouldn't trade either one because it's let them learn so many things along the way. So keep that in mind as you're following your dream and trying to make your company get off the ground, because it's going to be fabulous and you're going to have an impact no matter what happens tomorrow.
I absolutely agree with that.
Dr. McMurry-Heath, thank you so much again for taking the time to talk with us today. Your story is truly inspiring and your wisdom is profound, and we can't think of a better person to take the helm at such a key organization as Bio during challenging times like these. We definitely learned a lot from you today, and please know that we are true champions of your mission, and we cannot wait to see this vision play out in reality.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to join you. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Have a great day.